Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Today we welcome Paul Dupuis. Thank you, Paul, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It is another series of HR Voices that we're running, and today we'll be discussing about the global hiring trends. Paul, first of all, just a brief backdrop from you. Past year has all been about layoffs, from giants like Microsoft to Indian companies. Everybody is laying off in the name of the basic concept behind the layoffs that they're telling is restructuring. So in the name of restructuring, do you think a layoff is the only mode of survival for companies across the globe? I'm not naming any company because it's happening across borders.
Yep.
So do you think that, layoff is the only way that companies can survive, and in the name of restructuring, is that the only way they can, cut on costs?
First of all, I should say that my view is a bit unique because I have an outside in, inside out view. Having lived in India for 4 years as CEO of Randstad in India, 2017 to 2021, now in Japan as CEO of Randstad in Japan, and being part of a global company, Randstad, the number one company in HR services, I can look at the full kind of global view. While in the media, especially in India, we hear a lot about layoffs, it is true. At the same time, we should rewind back a few years and think about all the hiring that was happening as well.
Exactly.
So the economy is really about waves. It's about ebbs and flows. One thing we've learned over generations is that while layoffs may happen, there will be hiring that follows. That's the natural flow of things. We are in unusual times. We're on what we hope is the tail end of COVID. In modern history, there's never been an event like this, what we've experienced.
Exactly.
And so, of course, companies are not laying off purely to cut costs on their operating expenses. Many of the leaders that I speak to are focusing on being future ready. In other words, making sure their organizations are future ready. What we hear a lot about now is workforce planning. And workforce planning is really about what is the right size. How do you get to a right-sized organization to be ready for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow?
So is it right-sizing or is it downsizing?
I believe it's right-sizing. While you're reducing number of staff, it's about right-sizing. And I can tell you as a CEO, I monitor this closely, always thinking about, do I have the right, not only the right size of workforce, but the right variety and spread. If we talk about core, permanent, full-time employees versus contractual workers, versus temp, versus gig, and so on. So a lot of companies actually gain some wisdom during the pandemic. And as we come out of that, I think you're going to see some right sizing. At the same time, we know that the first half of 2023 looks to be cautious globally when it comes to the economy. But we also know that there's some positive news coming. So there's an old phrase that I like that many leaders follow, and I believe in this. Don't make a permanent decision. Don't make a permanent decision for a temporary problem. So we have something I think is temporary. I believe that it will bounce back.
Is something that's temporary? Don't you think that companies who are in the name of restructuring, of course, they would opt for situations like layoffs in the name of right sizing their workforce?
I think many of the companies absolutely will. The companies that maybe hired over aggressively pre-pandemic and rode the wave of, and we had quite a run of a strong economy around the world, not only India, right? The stock markets were at record highs, and we've seen also right sizing and right valuations of the stock market as well. Absolutely believe, let's always remember, the economy is based on ebb and flow, on waves, okay? It's never one direction, either way, right? So again, I think everything we're seeing now is a temporary response to the current situation that we're in. Rewind back to pre-COVID when companies were hiring like mad. And now what we see is some wisdom showing up, lessons learned, right sizing, but I absolutely believe it will come back. We're already seeing signs of it.
Why right after the Great Resignation? There were times last year only, in first 2 quarters, where people were resigning in large numbers to an extent that, there was shortage of talent. Then came the aspect of talent crunch within organizations. Why right after talent crunch and great resignations, popping up of concept like wherein companies are only suddenly thinking of right sizing their own organizations?
Well, I think it's actually a combination of two, right? This thing called the Great Resignation, I think it's a little bit overdone. I honestly, I look at the data we have around the world of Randstad. We, in our own company, we didn't see a massive spike with many of the companies we support, and we support thousands and thousands of companies around the world. We don't see this massive exodus. I think it was a little bit of hype frankly, when we talk about the great resignation. We heard about quiet quitting. That phenomenon has been there a long time, huh? There are always employees who are not
It's a term that has
motivated.
been devised, but the concept is not new.
No, it's not new. Again, and I would go back to the great resignation. What people have decided to do is put value on their lifestyle. So not working to live or living to work, but finding that happy medium in between, that loving what you do, not just what you do, but how you work. Okay. So people are choosing jobs and navigating their career now with this added extra piece, criteria, which is choosing the way of working. So companies are seeing that their employees have a new value system that they're bringing to the table, particularly young, the new workforce. So we're talking about the people, the freshers coming in and so on. They're highly motivated by a couple things. One is purpose, values. The other one is the way of working. They want to have the freedom to decide how they're going to work. And that's new for companies to navigate.
Paul, we've seen an astronomical rise in young organizations engaging large workforces. You very rightly pointed out there was a time wherein companies were blindly hiring. And it has also given rise to many new concepts. Great resignation, it has been overdone, talked about a lot, but it's something that's not been vanished. And so is the new concept that's popping in again is career cushioning, wherein basically it's a romanticized concept wherein a lover always keeps a backup option in case of breakups and heartbreaks. But so are employees in such uncertain times wherein companies overnight decide to lay off employees in large numbers. They do not have a backup option, and in the name of having a backup option, they're actually cushioning their respective careers. Do you think sudden planning of layoffs like this will lead to concepts wherein there'll be apprehension in people's mind in being hired by any organization?
Oh, of course. Well, the old phrase, once bitten, twice shy, right? And I think that the companies that are taking a knee-jerk reaction to right-sizing or downsizing, or in your words, restructuring.
Yeah.
If we fast forward to when the economy bounces back, and it will bounce back. Let's go back to our original premise. The economy is about ebbs and flows and waves. Exactly. When it bounced back, there would be some companies that probably will look back and say, well, if we could do it again, we might have done it differently. So from the company, the hiring standpoint, I think there's some wisdom being gained. Now, let's be careful not to brush the entire economy and all companies with one brush. Let's not paint them with one brush. In fact, there are some companies that are not restructuring and downsizing.
Exactly.
In fact, there are some companies that are taking full advantage of this moment to attract great talent. So credit to those companies that are thinking 2 and 3 steps ahead. I would call that preparing for the day after tomorrow. From the job seeker standpoint, whether you're a fresher or someone who's mid-career, it's also very important to, you use the phrase plan B. I think it's always important to have options. And where are options born? Well, options are born when you bring a sense of added value to wherever you go. And this is why it's important for everyone, especially when the economy is turbulent, to be learning, to constantly building new muscles and taking on new skills. And this is why, for example, we see the whole world of education, ed tech, and so on, really growing around the world, not only in India.
Right.
Because people realize the best investment you can make in anything is in yourself and your own development.
When you're talking about making changes in your own self, there also comes in a term called upskilling. Yep. Upskilling is basically considered these days for organizations wherein they do not need to hire talent from outside. They can actually upskill their existing talent, while it is also an added advantage for the employee itself because we'll be getting an extra skill into it. Do you think it is a mode of companies to retain employees or to retain talent from the existing workforce? Or do you think it's a fad? It'll wash away in time?
Yeah, so again, absolutely what I believe and what I said earlier is that the companies that get it right take this approach. Your best employee is the one you already have. It's kind of similar to sales. If you talk to great salespeople, they'll tell you that your best customer is the one you already have,
exactly,
not the new one you search for. So companies that put people first also focus on creating an environment where their people can grow and invest in learning and development. We've seen it time and time again. During the GFC, in 2007, 2008, through into 2009, there were 2 responses. Some companies immediately cut people and cut their operating expenses, including learning and development budgets. Okay. Other companies said, no, we're not going to let anybody go. And counterintuitively, we're going to invest in our people. Those companies were ready for the bounce back. and they also built such a strong sense of loyalty and commitment from their workforce, then of course they went on to outperform. So again, let's look at the bigger picture, and not only in India, but around the world, there are some companies that are absolutely getting it right, that are thinking ahead, that gain some wisdom from past experiences, like the dot-com bubble, like the GFC, and so on. Yeah.
In order to curb the layoff menace that's going on, what in your views can be some strategic moves by the employer as well as the employee both?
Well, certainly from the employer standpoint, what I said earlier, I think that's a very important mantra. Don't make a permanent decision for a temporary problem. Yeah, it's really important for us to take a longer term view. I would say I've come to appreciate that, especially being based in Japan. In Japan, the company is in many ways seen as a community. In fact, the word company in Japanese is kaisha, and kaisha, when you reverse the characters, it's shakai, and shakai actually means society or community. A company is a society or a community, and you protect your community. And so in Japan, companies are very hesitant to dramatically and suddenly downsize. In fact, that's the last item they cut. So isn't that interesting, huh? Protect your people. That's not only limited to Japan. I think there are companies in India, absolutely, that approach it the same way. Put people first. Protect your people at all costs. Of course, your performers,
but
especially your
most
performers.
organizations only consider it as a mark of checklist that,
Some do.
we
Some
are
do.
a culture who put people first, but in their actions, it's not shown.
Well, I would tell you that in our current world, those companies can't hide, huh? Information travels fast. Yeah, and we do know, though, by the way, that referrals are golden, and that's one thing we've learned over the years, that when companies then want to upsize and hire great people, the first place to go is to your own great people. If you've treated your people well, especially in times of crisis, they will be loyal and committed to you,
and they'll always remember you.
They'll always remember you, and they'll introduce great people.
Looking at the international talent requirements, Paul, in near, what do you think will be a desired skill set that employers will be looking in for employees while hiring?
We've seen such a trend. If you go back to the 60s, there was a time where generalists were in need. And then it started to move towards specialists. We wanted people that were narrow and deep in their skill set. IQ was very important for a long time. In fact, IQ, a high IQ in the 60s and 70s, was a predictive element of becoming an exceptional leader. In other words, this person is intelligent, therefore he or she would be on the fast track to leadership. Well, we learned some lessons, huh? The smartest people are not necessarily the best leaders, right? They know, but not necessarily can lead. Then the next one was born, if you recall, EQ. After IQ came EQ, emotional quotient. So it's not only about being intelligent, it's about being able to connect with people. That is a very important muscle moving forward. I'm going to add a third one, which is not talked about enough. And I learned this valuable lesson in India during the worst times of COVID. CQ, compassion quotient. Compassion. And compassion is like empathy plus plus. Empathy is feeling how the other person's feeling. Compassion is actually doing something about it. So what I believe is when we talk about soft skills, of course, all of those things I just mentioned, IQ, EQ, now compassion quotient. And let's add the other ones that we hear a lot about. Agility. Agility is the ability to sidestep, to move back, to move forward, to be nimble, to be flexible, right? And the other one, of course, is constantly be learning, always be learning. These are things that I look for when I'm hiring people. I look for someone who shows intelligence, not only academically, but also emotional, and as well as somebody who shows efforts to help others who are in need. So that's the compassion quotient. Hence my own mantra of do well, do good, right? Yeah.
What about soft skills? What do you think, what kind of role does it play when you hire any employee or when you communicate with any employee, any newbie? What is the role of soft skills that an employer looks into? What's a broader picture into it?
So here's the interesting thing. The younger generation that's coming up, let's call the freshers, the workforce of the future. It's not only the freshers, it's the Gen Zs and beyond millennials. They grew up with a tablet in their hand. They didn't grow up with a pen and a pencil or pencil and a paper in their hand. They grew up with a tablet. Everything's been electronic for them. So here's the interesting thing, and we have data to show this. That generation is longing for the human touch. They want to be with other people. They don't want to sit in front of a monitor all day long. And proportionally, if you look at offices around the world, and we've done an amazing study that revealed that the largest percentage by demographic of people that are showing up in offices around the world right now, today, are the younger generation, people in their 20s and younger 30s. Okay. The larger proportion of people working at home are people in their 40s and 50s. Isn't that interesting?
Of course it is. It's
So
the way
the,
that it's
the
based.
young folks who grew up in a digital generation are actually longing for touch.
And do you think it's something of a quotient that will be a prime suspect for employers going ahead when they are seeking some different skills in people?
Absolutely. The ability to connect both using tech and touch will be a very important ability moving forward. So I think we need to be very careful. Let's not get mesmerized or infatuated with technology as a way to communicate. I think this is a very important skill set for the future.
Human touch.
The human touch. So let's call it tech for touch. Tech for touch. Not having tech replace the touch. So there is that balance between, in-person communication, collaboration, celebration, which happens in person. And then there's, of course, the digital element. I think we need to find that balance. People who have that balance and can thrive in both environments, both in front of a monitor as well as face-to-face, are going to do very well in the new world.
Hiring during profitable market and firing when markets are down, it impacts society. You and me, we both agree to it.
Yeah.
Do you feel that organizations should look at a larger picture as social responsibility and hire in a sustainable proportion? I'll tell you why. Because today, in the name of right sizing and in the name of restructuring, they're thinking and they're giving out as responses that we did not do sustainable hiring in past times. And suddenly, this concept of sustainable hiring comes into place. What's in it for freshers to understand this new concept and build a skill set that they get hired in a proportional number?
So typically, when it comes to a company and hiring, past behavior is an indication of future behavior when it comes to a company. In other words, if I was a person seeking a job, or I was a young person, for example, we know that, by the way, companies interview candidates, but candidates interview companies. And my advice to the job seekers, or the people who are navigating through these challenging times, you should interview the company that you're applying to or that you're interviewing
Is
with.
it only in the name of work-life balance that
No,
they
no.
kind of
Let me clarify. When they're interviewing the company, they should be looking at the past track record. For example, I would take it back to the global financial crisis. How did that company react? Company A, how did they respond? Because past behavior is an indication of future behavior. Go back to the dot-com bubble, GFC, COVID. How has that company responded? If you are sitting across from a company as a candidate, a job seeker, and you hear that this company actually put people first and protected their people at all costs through these crises, this is probably an interesting company to explore for opportunities.
So that means you want to convey past behaviors are actually a present kind of a mirror or a picture for people who want to get hired
Absolutely,
into an
absolutely.
organization.
Partially. Now let's be fair, because there are companies that have made mistakes in the past that learn from that and therefore
Exactly, I
won't do
was
it again.
gonna come to that.
Well, we should
Companies will
always take an optimistic view of this. But there are companies that have a track record of whenever a crisis comes, they massively downsize. Then and that's, let's say, a fair part of the equation, that if you join that company, there is a high chance that a similar sort of thing might happen. And if you're okay with that as a job seeker, then that's fine. But it's, forewarned is forearmed, as we say.
Well, we do have such an interesting views from you, and now that the conversation has come to a point wherein we would want you to list down top 5 things that you think people should always keep in mind going ahead with what kind of trends they're going to fall into.
The world is moving and changing at a breakneck speed. We've never seen this pace of change ever in modern history. What I just said right now, you could have said 100 years ago. When the Industrial Revolution, when the very first conveyor belt was introduced and the Industrial Revolution struck, the same thing was said. Never have we seen this pace of change, right? This has gone on since the beginning of time, frankly. So here we are now. The pace of change is extremely fast. We know that. Well, then it comes back to, is change good or is change bad? Is change a threat? I absolutely believe we should embrace change. So that's number one. Accept the fact that change is a constant and will continue to happen through the rest of our journey, the rest of our lives and our career, okay? So that's one. So that would be one of the 5. The other one is what I said earlier, is about the idea of being agile. What does agile really mean? Agile means to be able to pivot when it's necessary. In other words, while you may have a goal and you have a roadmap for yourself, sometimes we need to pivot. And that leads to the third one. Take the stance of control the controllables and respond to the non-controllables. Control the controllables, respond to the non-controllables. And that's an important message not only for your career, but I think for life in general. control the controllables. Yeah, we deal with the rest. Yeah. All right. The next one is the third one is I'm a big fan of Jugad. I am a big fan of Jugad, and I lived in India and I discovered this amazing thing called Jugad. I think that in India, I believe it's a secret weapon. I believe one of the things that the future talent of India has that no one else has in the world is deep in the DNA is Jugad. Leverage Jugad. Make Jugad your secret weapon as an individual, as a person navigating a career, but also as
Please
India.
clarify, it's in very positive light that you're talking about
When I talk
Jugad.
about Jugad, it's in positive light. I know it's controversial and debatable, but my view of Jugad is creativity, ingenuity. Let's find a way to get it done. I love it. And I think that the spirit of Jugad is can do. Can do. The can do spirit is so important for people now navigating their way forward. Yeah, I said earlier, always be learning. Lifelong learning. It's never been more important than now. The best investment you can make is in yourself. Rather than buy stuff, rather than buying things, invest in yourself. It's so important. And by the way, when I'm hiring for my own organization, I look for people that have spent effort, time, maybe resources on growing themselves.
But these are subjective
learning.
things. How can you
These are
judge?
well, I would, for example, let's do an interview right now. Huh? I would ask you this question right now. I would say, okay, so tell me in the past 3 years, what have you done to improve yourself in any way, personally or professionally?
Well, that would be working on communication skills.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that. What have you done specifically?
Specifically, I have been reading a few, hearing a few podcasts as well. And then the way they share their anecdotes is something that always interests me. So they do have stories to share, but there's a way to communicate those stories so that it leaves a mark in another person's life. So yeah, that's something that, I worked upon.
So you listen to podcasts. You do that every day in the morning when you're going for a
No,
walk?
I am not an ardent, audience to podcasts, but, something that interests me. Some topic that interests me could be in English, could be in Hindi, something that catches my attention.
Okay, so we'll push pause right here. The fact you shared with me that you listen to podcasts and you do it regularly tells me that you're curious. Because listening to a podcast once and done, that's not curiosity, that's not lifelong learning. So I searched for that with you right now. Now, if we were interviewing, I would have asked you, give me a specific, which podcast do you listen to? Tell me more. I would look it up while we're sitting here. I would actually look at it. I would challenge you. What is one thing you learned from a podcast? Oh, and you tell me, okay, have you put that in practice? Tell me how you put it in practice. So that's how.
So you are actually seeking real life examples and how your respective candidate puts it into application. That's really important. It's not just blabbering and preparing for this interview, seeking number of names and telling that, I hear this podcast, but it's actually a learning that you're seeking on how are you imbibing those values within your daily life.
If you go back to, the ultimate measurement of the exceptional leader, or let's say any professional, execute, right? What are you doing to take what you've learned to execute for impact? In other words, take action. Execution is about action, right? For impact. I would ask you that. The last one, clearly, I would say surround yourself with great people. Call this a soft skill? I think so. Connect. Surround yourself with great people. Of course, there's the famous phrase, you are the average of the 5 people you hang around with. Absolutely. Maybe it's the average of the 10 people or the 20 people. But whatever it is, if you really want to grow and develop and be future ready, surround yourself with people who are curious, who are constantly learning, who also are agile, who may also be listening to podcasts.
That's a key word actually from this conversation. Agility is something that's one of the aspects that is or should be inculcated in, employees that are going for hiring practices in times to come. Thank you so much, Paul.
Great
it was
to
a
chat
pleasure
with you.
Speaking with
Thank you. And
Thank
great
you so
to
much
be
for
back
doing
in
that.
incredible India. I think the road ahead is very optimistic. India is poised for a very exciting future.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.